Hillary Clinton was on TV. She seems to be ecstatic about what's taking place in Burma, Myanmar, and I listened to radio last night, and they allowed many of the political prisoners have been released from prison. They had one Burmese sister who hasn't seen her father in many years. She was in England. You could hear the British accent, and she wanted to come, be reunited with her father. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see the developments in Myanmar, Burma? And the last question is, could you talk about the fact that the Portuguese, I think Portugal has had like junk status. You talked about it in terms of the money situation, and the fact that the euro crisis, I guess with Germany's in control of the whole EU.
Yeah.
But Burma, Myanmar, and the whole question of the euro and that situation.
Well, as you know, the rating agencies, which are basically corrupt, they're the ones who determine the ability of a government to pay back on the money that it borrows. They just downgraded France and a number of other European countries, which is another blow against President Sarkozy. Because what this means is that France will probably have to pay more in order to borrow money. What's interesting about the European crisis is that it is extreme. There's no question about it. It's an extreme crisis, and there are those who suggest that the euro may break up, even the European Union may break up. And I don't dispute those allegations. But looking at the short term, what's interesting is that basically the value of the euro, the common European currency, really hasn't gone down that much throughout this crisis. And to the extent that it has gone down, it's benefited the most powerful exporting nation, which is Germany, which makes its exports cheaper, not only in Europe, but around the world. I mean, here you have Germany, a country of 82 million, that exports more goods in terms of value than China, population of 1.3 billion. And so with the cheaper currency, the German corporations are benefiting to a degree. And what's also interesting, too, is that, to connect this to another issue, you may know, and I'm sure this will be of interest to Canadians, given the special relationship between Canada and the UK, that apparently a decision has been made that will allow Scotland to take a vote to pull out of the United Kingdom to a degree. It's unclear to what degree we're talking about. Anything from full-scale independence to a degraded status within the United Kingdom. And what it enables, in part, Scotland to do this, not only because of Scottish nationalism, which has been waxing and waning for centuries. You know that Scotland's formal association with the UK only came in 1707 with the Act of Union. But the existence of the European Union, in a sense, enables and empowers Scotland, because, say if Scotland becomes independent, to a degree, they could probably get more money from Brussels than they get from London, because it's a bigger pot of money. So it's interesting that the consolidation of Europe has this contradictory tendency, perhaps, of encouraging nationalism. I mean, it's a classic case of a dialectic. I mean, the continent is coming together on the one hand, and then that helps to generate internally in countries movements towards regionalism and independence. As noted, as you noted in your introductory remarks, I tend to think that the European Union is going to stay together, but it'll just be, like I said, just like Bob Marley and the Wailers. It's just that Germany will be Bob Marley and the rest of these countries will be the Wailers, basically. And with all due respect to the Wailers, by the way. I don't mean any disrespect. And with regard to Myanmar, I think the best news out of Myanmar is that in the context of releasing political prisoners, that you've had a warming of relations between the minority groups in Myanmar, of which there are a profusion, which have been waging war against the central regime. They're now waging peace with the central regime. That's good news because that could have led to the disintegration of the country. But obviously one has to be very nervous about this attempt by Washington to basically establish some sort of military relationship with Myanmar aimed at China. I mean, let's face it, China's diplomacy over the past few decades has not been good. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they don't have excellent relations with Vietnam. They wage war on Vietnam. I remember, I'm not as young as I look, by the way. So I remember in 1979 when Deng Xiaoping, the then paramount leader of China, came to the United States. And this is the old China, before the economic takeoff. And he left with his pockets bulging with contracts from U.S. corporations. That was the beginning of the takeoff. And it was not long thereafter that China was waging war in Vietnam. The United States was very angry at Vietnam because the Vietnamese pushed the United States out in 1975 in an ignominious defeat for Washington. And even before then, as you know, going back centuries, Chinese-Vietnamese relations were not very good. 1962, China wages war against India. Now, there are many explanations for that. The latest that I've heard and read about was that it was time to coincide with the U.S. pressure on Cuba and the Soviets, that this was this sort of two-pronged attack. So look, China has a lot to apologize for, but having said that, to me it still doesn't justify this rather maniacal plan, this diabolical plan to try to destabilize the largest country by population in the world.
Okay, we wanted to move on to deal with Dr. Horne's two books. Now, Dr. Horne was a lawyer at one time. He's the Morris Professor of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston, and he used to teach at Chapel Hill in North Carolina. And he had
great basketball teams in Chapel Hill.
I was getting ready, boy, you read. He used to teach Vince Carter, Jerry Stackhouse. Is Stackhouse still playing or is he retired?
I think he's right. Vince is playing with Dallas now.
Yeah. Brendan Harewood, and there was a fourth one. Who was the other person that you taught?
I can't remember so many of those guys. Did the Raptors play last night?
They lost. Jamal McGlure.
Oh, that's right. They lost to Indiana.
Yeah.
Right.
Jamal McGlure supposedly had made the coach Casey put him in, and Jamal can't. It's like Shaq. He can't make free throws. So.
Oh God.
And he, Casey apologized for putting Jamal in, and
That's
Jamal
not good.
and Jamal.
Well, he's from Ontario, right?
He's from down the street. Right. Yeah. Jamal McGlure. Oh boy, one. Used to live.
What kind of name is he Haitian?
So he has some Haitian roots, I understand, but he used to be my next door neighbor as a kid. Yeah, he lived on Havenbrook. He's Trinidadian.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. McGlure, but
Can't hit free throws though.
no, he's like Shaq, just like Shaq. But Dr. Horne is here to talk about two new books: Fighting in Paradise, Labor Unions, Racism and Communists in the Making of Modern Hawaii, and also
Negro Comrades of the Crown.
Negro Comrades of the Crown, African Americans and the British Empire fight the U.S. before emancipation. I know some people have a problem with that term, Negro, but
Well, let's get right to it. I'm writing a book right now, not literally as we speak, but as we speak generally, on revising 1776, basically. And one of the sentences I've just written is that the Spanish term for black, Negro, invaded the English language almost as effortlessly as Negro-led troops from Spain invaded British colonies. That is to say that in terms of understanding the historical trajectory of the Americas, it's important to realize that as early as 1555 in Cuba, you have evidence of Africans armed, where of course that was not necessarily the norm in British territory. And part of my argument is, and we'll get to this, is that there was so much pressure that the Spanish Empire, which after all was the leader for the longest time in terms of colonizing the Americas, they were putting so much pressure on the British in particular that it ultimately forces Britain to incorporate Negro soldiers as well. And so a short and dirty history of hundreds of years is that Spanish Florida, recall that Florida, now part of the United States of America, was controlled by Spain from the early 1500s of the days of Ponce de Leon and the Fountain of Youth to 1763 when they're ousted by the British, and then they come back in 1783, and then the United States ousts Spain in 1819, 1820. But Spanish Florida was pulverizing South Carolina and the British colonies. As a matter of fact, there was a real danger, thought London. Oh, sorry about that. There was a real danger that, thought the colonists, that these Negroes and the Spanish would basically sort of oust the British colonies and sort of take over. I mean, as a matter of fact, some of them felt that they'd all be liquidated.
So that's the imperialist rivalry going on way back then.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Inter-imperialist rivalry.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And let me start with this book before I get to 1776, because I'm a little fickle in the sense that whatever I'm working on becomes my preoccupation, and to me this is in the past now, so it's sort of hard to focus on. So, but let me focus on this. Part of the thesis of this book is that there's a long-term debate about why Britain moved to abolish slavery after it had profited so handsomely from the slave trade. Eric Williams of Trinidad and Tobago and Capitalism and Slavery puts forward a particular thesis. I'm putting forward a new thesis here. My thesis is that it's the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804. That like many colonial powers, Britain tried to overthrow the regime and suffered one of the most ignominious defeats in British colonial history. And then decided to make a virtue out of necessity by moving more aggressively towards abolition, since it recognized that the Haitian Revolution, the establishment of the African Republic in the hemisphere, changed the calculus with regard to slavery. Certainly, if Britain did not improve relations with Haiti, it might jeopardize the sugar colonies, Jamaica in the first place. But not only that, after losing the so-called 13 colonies in the 1776 revolt, they then had to worry about the planter class in the sugar colonies aligning with this new republic in North America, the United States. And so it made sense to a degree for Britain, particularly since their slaves were not on British soil, literally, they were overseas, to make an adjustment. And also to make an adjustment because that allowed Britain to better compete against their rising rival, that is to say the United States of America, which, after overthrowing British rule, beginning in 1776, had begun to shout from the rooftops that they had discovered the secret to happiness, which is getting rid of the crown, and that republicanism was the wave of the future. They had seen the future in their works. That Britain and the crown and monarchy was it was antiquated. It was headed for the dustbin of history, which of course was quite a severe blow to the British national psyche. So Britain then could pivot, given these circumstances, and appeal to the enslaved African class in the United States of America, who were Anglophiles to the nth degree, not least because the enemy of my enemy is my friend.